Well, it was exactly the race we hoped for in this start of this new Formula One era, 2022 Formula One cars. We said yesterday that it was going to be a very interesting battle. I think that was the adjective I used, between the Ferraris and the Red Bulls, because Red Bull had this significant top speed advantage, which was very clear throughout Friday and Saturday, as we said in the videos from both those 2 days. And so it proved in the race. Without DRS, the Red Bulls were consistently 6 to 7 kilometers an hour through the speed trap quicker than the Ferraris of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. So it was a question of, and it was a really interesting question, of how that would pan out as the race developed. Now, Red Bull's philosophy to Max Verstappen was just be there in the mirrors of Charles Leclerc, and then right at the end of the race, hopefully he will have used up enough tyres through sector 1, which is the one where the top speed obviously counts for least. And by then it would be an easy pass for Max in terms of top speed. And it's never easy, of course. Variables come into play. And what came into play on this occasion, 10 laps to go basically, was a virtual safety car. And in that period, obviously the tyres lost temperature. And that affected Ferrari more than Red Bull for the simple reason that they require more grip to do their lap than Red Bull. There's nothing like having a top speed advantage. If you can speak to any racing driver worth his salt anywhere in the world and you say, we can take off a little bit of wing on race day, you're going to have a 2 to 3 mile an hour or kilometre an hour advantage with not much loss on the race lap. And what are they going to say? Yeah, give it to me. And that's the easiest pass. Of course, it wasn't that easy. And I don't want to get too complicated here in describing everything that took place. Hopefully most of you saw the action either on TV or at the racetrack. But it wasn't that easy for Max to do those passes because DRS came into play. And with the new downforce and the wake of these current cars, it was clear that coming out of corners, there's also quite a lot to be gained behind another car, as Max Verstappen pointed out after the race. So Max did his pass, Charles repassed him, just like Bahrain. Max attempted another pass. This is on the last 10 laps of the race, going into the last corner, let's call it a hairpin, and braked too late and locked up all four. And at that moment, Charles Leclerc just did a beautiful turn in from the outside to retake the lead yet again. And then eventually Max did get him down the pit straight into turn 1. And then once he'd got in front going into sector 1, then he could eke out an advantage, because then it was going to be difficult for Charles to do anything. But it was interesting, when he was in the DRS of the Red Bull, Charles' top speed through the trap went up from something like 298 to 317, but he still couldn't do very much. So in the end, on this very, very fast circuit with long straights, long amounts of full throttle, it was the Red Bulls with that significant top speed advantage that won the day, and kind of predictably won the day. That was what I felt yesterday was going to happen. But it wasn't easy, and it was brilliant racing, brilliantly covered for those that were watching on TV, on TV in terms of cockpit cams, rear vision, rear facing cameras as well, onboard cameras facing the front. Really, really good TV. Spectacular race under night in Saudi Arabia. I think one thing Ferrari will take away from this is that if we can get that close to Red Bull on a circuit like this, bring on Melbourne, because around that circuit, it's very difficult to see how the Ferrari won't just be a brilliantly quick car. But let's go back to the start of the race, because Sergio Perez is on the pole, having got the pole, helped, of course, by that phenomenal top speed through the traps that he was recording throughout Friday and Saturday, 335 kilometers an hour. He was on the pole and he made a really good start. And he was driving beautifully in that early phase of the race with Charles Leclerc behind him, then Max, and then Carlos Sainz. Just look at the top speeds they were doing on full tanks, because all gloves were off at that point. But Sergio Perez, really quick in a straight line, the quickest at that moment for sure, 309, 310 kilometers an hour. Charles Leclerc behind him couldn't get in the DRS, 302, 298. And then Max Verstappen, 307, Carlos Sainz, 297. And George Russell behind that doing a very good job in the Mercedes, 298. So a really, really big difference on full tanks and as the race progressed. And I keep going on about top speed because it is so significant in terms of how you're going to plan a pass and how you're going to plan a race. They all started on the medium tyre, and it was going to be a one-stop strategy race going to the hard tyre. And for Red Bull, of course, this was a slightly difficult situation, because ultimately in a perfect world, they would want to have Max in front of Sergio. But from Sergio's point of view, it had worked out beautifully, because there was Charles Leclerc in his mirrors, not able to do very much, just sitting there, staying within 1.2, 1.5 seconds, but not looking as if he was going to put any pressure on Sergio. And there was Max in P3. So from Sergio's point of view, all he had to do was just control the race from there, and potentially the night was going to be his. But it all went wrong for Sergio just after his first pit stop when he went to the hard tyre. Just at that moment, Nicholas Latifi, yet again, shades of Abu Dhabi, hit the wall and brought out a safety car, which then enabled all the other runners to come in. And by the time that had settled, it was Charles Leclerc now leading with Max Verstappen second and Sergio Perez third. Or was he? There was a bit of a schmozzle over who was in front of the safety car line as Carlos Sainz came out of the pits. Really good stack pit stop by Ferrari, by the way. And it was Carlos just ahead. But Sergio kind of edged him out coming out of the first corner, the chicane there, the right-hander. A little bit like Nico Hülkenberg versus, I think it was Felipe Massa in Singapore a few years ago. Very similar thing, but they've got a more defined rule now about the safety car line there as a result of that Singapore incident, actually. And Carlos, very clear that he was just ahead on the safety car line. He's probably got a very good view of that, a better view than Sergio, who's actually on the racetrack at this moment, and got on the radio, and sure enough, a lap later, Sergio backed off and let Carlos take that position. And that's how they finished in the race, as it turned out. Carlos Sainz had a slight problem with gear shifts at one moment, but drove really well to finish P3 ahead of Sergio Perez, who would have been very disappointed after qualifying and after how the first phase of the race went. But anyway, back to the front, because it's now Charles Leclerc in front. There are no more pit stops ahead. They're on the hard tyre. And it's a question of, is Charles going to use up more of that tyre by maximising his advantage on the lap, which is basically through sector 1, where there are more corners and more braking and more traction events, as they like to say? Or would it be a question of Max breezing past in the closing laps because of his top speed advantage? Well, it was, as I say, it was a very, very close run thing. And had the virtual safety car not come out as a result of 2 or 3 cars stopping on the circuit, no incident, no crash this time, but it was enough to take the temperature out of the tyres and to take away some of the advantage that Charles had through sector 1. So all of a sudden, at the restart, going into that first sector, Max was all over Charles for the first time in a way we'd never really seen him. Before that VSC period, if you were watching the gap between Charles and Max, just looking at nothing other than the gap in real time throughout the lap, it would start, as they cross the start-finish line, it would be something like 1.2 seconds. This is a typical lap. And then it would go up almost to 2 seconds by the time they'd come out of sector 1. And by the time they got to the end of sectors 2 and 3, where Max was starting to use his advantage in top speed, it was down to 1.2, 1.3 seconds again. And they were trading fastest laps. Max was, as his normal thing, 5, 6, 7 kilometers an hour quicker in a straight line. Wasn't getting into the DRS zone until this virtual safety car period. And then when that happened, and when Charles found he had less grip in that first sector, then of course Max was in a position to pounce. And as I say, it wasn't that easy. It had sort of 3 or 4 attempts to do it. For those who've been a regular viewer of this channel for a while now, you'll know how highly I rate Charles Leclerc. I've often regularly bracketed him, even when he was finishing 6th, 7th and 8th in the Ferrari in those difficult years recently. Even when he was going through that period, I've always bracketed him there with Lewis and Max as one of the best 3 drivers in the world because of the suppleness of his inputs, because of his accuracy, and because of, dare I say it, his strength of character and his personality, given all the things that have happened in his personal background. So I've always been massively into Charles Leclerc, no, won't hide that. And I think today, any doubters there would have seen how good this guy is. He really is a superb racing driver. He's really good in traffic, really good dicing, and really good at putting the lap together as well. And I think Charles is quite political as well, because I think he got on the radio on the slowdown lap and said something like, Max, that was a great race, I really enjoyed it, Max drove brilliantly. And I think that was just to counter any question of sort of Jonathan Wheatley comments to race control about Charles had been doing this or weaving here, which personally I don't think he did. I think Charles was absolutely on the limit, but I think he was absolutely what is acceptable in racing today. But nonetheless, I thought it was a clever move by Charles, maybe egged on by Ferrari, jock clear, I don't know. But certainly a good move to say, oh yeah, Max drove really well, just to take the heat out of that situation. So yeah, fabulous race. I think it'll do a lot for Formula One, that race, won't it? Because it was at peak viewing time all around Europe as well, 6 o'clock at night start. And it was almost like watching a Hollywood movie, all the different camera angles you were able to see. And it was just non-stop tension from start to finish. I was saying yesterday, it's a shame there aren't any real corners on that circuit. I still think, speaking as a purist, that's the case. But I've got to say, as a computer game circuit, it is pretty good, isn't it? Lots of places where one car can make up ground. And I got to hand it here to Pat Simmons and the team as well, and Jason Somerville for the job they've done on this 2022 car. Ross Brawn, I guess, at the top of all that, because they do seem to be able to sit a bit nearer, and we did see quite a lot of passes going on. Whether those passes would have happened with the old cars, I think they probably would. I mean, DRS is still a massive factor, isn't it? It'll be interesting now to see whether or not they think they can get away with getting rid of DRS. It'll be interesting to see how much passing there would be on a circuit like that with DRS, because there's big differences in top speed now between the cars. There's more differences between the Ferrari, the Honda, Red Bull, whatever you want to call it, and the Mercedes and the Renault than we've had for a long time. And because of that, it would be really interesting to see how it all worked if we didn't have DRS, I think. So yeah, great race. Carlos Sainz finished third, Sergio Perez fourth, disappointing for him. George Russell, really good job, P5. I mean, there was a moment when Lewis didn't come in for that first safety car because he'd started on the hards. He was coming from the back, he and Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg, actually. And they started on the hard tyre. And so they gained good track position when everybody else came in. And there was a moment when Lewis could see George, and he just had Kevin Magnussen between him and George, which was good. From where he was, that would have given him some confidence. But it was still interesting. And we couldn't really do any comparison because Lewis's tyres obviously were much older than George's. But he did a really good job. And the problem was when it was Latifi who hit the wall later in the race, Magnussen was able to come in just before they closed the pit lane. And they closed the pit lane because Daniel Ricciardo's McLaren was basically blocking it. And as Lewis came round to come in, he saw the McLaren there and correctly went on. And then they closed the pit lane. So he had to do yet another lap. So that was the end of his race, having driven really well, as we knew he would, as we always knew he would, from the back of the grid. He finished only 10th. But anyway, he'll probably be thinking, I really enjoyed that race because I passed quite a lot of cars, and ultimately I got up to George. And when I was with George, I was basically doing the same lap times, even though my tyres were, 15 laps older. So that will give Lewis a lot of confidence. And I suppose Mercedes will be thinking, there's not that long a straight in Melbourne, so let's get onto that racetrack and now see how we go there. Just got to get rid of all that porpoising, obviously. So with all of that, Esteban Ocon finished sixth. He had a big dice with Fernando Alonso early on. They're both on medium tyres, like everybody else at the start. And Esteban made a good start, but Fernando was really quick early on and came up and caught him and came up to pass. And they were sort of like this. It's a bit unnecessary, really. There's quite a lot of, I don't know what that was, really. It was sort of pride of, I will not be passed by my teammate stuff. And there was no element of respecting Fernando. Wow, this is Fernando, my senior team leader, I'll let him pass. None of that at all. Anyway, Fernando stopped in the end. He probably would have been sixth or seventh, but Esteban finished sixth. And Lando Norris, very good job to finish seventh. Mentioned him earlier. He ran wide in a chicane, but he did a really good job, I think, in the McLaren, which is not an easy car. And Daniel Ricciardo was not going too badly either, but stopped with no drive, I think it was. But Lando, very good to finish seventh, ahead of Pierre Gasly in the AlphaTauri. Excellent. Kevin Magnussen, 9th, Lewis 10th, and there we are. The only other thing I'd like to add in the race was the first corner move by Max Verstappen, where it looked like Carlos Sainz had got him going into the first part of that left-right, and he's here, and then Max just drove around the outside. Lovely move, just when Carlos wasn't expecting it. And that was Max Verstappen on full tanks, right at the beginning of the race, being a racing driver as it is, and he went on, of course, to win the Grand Prix. So yeah, a very good race in many ways. But I think the interesting thing in Melbourne will be to see whether Ferrari just keep their car as it is, knowing they've got a really good package for Melbourne now, and whether Red Bull can parlay some of that top speed to more downforce and take the race to Ferrari in terms of grip and balance around the lap. I suspect, knowing Adrian Newey, it'll be the latter, but that's an interesting question to look for. And the other one, of course, is whether Mercedes can get rid of all that bouncing and start focusing on getting weight out of that car and, above all, getting some grip and balance in it that takes them somewhere into the Red Bull Ferrari territory. So there we are. Looking forward to that race. I'll be doing a couple of videos before then, but thanks for watching. Thanks to Jetcraft for their continued support of this channel. See you soon.